there is et there are. Quelle est la différence et comment les utiliser, même au passé et au futur? Je vous explique. Salut tout le monde, moi c'est Gia, votre coach d'anglais. Sur cette chaîne, je vous donne des astuces pour progresser et parler plus naturellement en anglais. Comme d'habitude, vous retrouverez en description un PDF avec un résumé de la leçon ainsi qu'un petit quiz pour tester votre compréhension. Alors, activez les sous-titres si besoin parce qu'ici, pour apprendre l'anglais, on parle anglais et let's start. So, in French, we only have one way to think about this idea with il y a. But in English, we have there is and there are. So what is the key difference between these two? The most important thing is to think about the object itself. Is it singular or uncountable, or is it plural? Countable nouns are things that I can easily count with numbers. For example, I can count 1, 2, 3 restaurants. It's much more difficult to count, for example, juice without another form of measurement. Maybe boxes of juice. But juice itself, I cannot say 1, 2, 3 juices. If it's singular or uncountable, use there is or there's. For example, there is some juice in the fridge. Or there is a party tonight. If the object is plural, use there are. For example, there are 3 restaurants nearby. When you speak, you can contract this to there are, but avoid writing this contraction. Okay, so that's the main difference between these two. But what about making a negative sentence? For there is, we can make there is not. Contracted to usually there isn't, but there's not is also acceptable. For uncountables, use there isn't any. There isn't any juice. For countable nouns, this can be a little bit more specific. So, for example, I could say there isn't a party tonight. But here, if I use there isn't a party, I'm being very specific. I have a specific party in mind. For example, there isn't a party at my friend's house tonight, but maybe there's a party somewhere else, or maybe there are many other parties in the city. For there are, we can make there are not, contracted to there aren't. If I say there aren't any parties tonight, this is a general statement. I'm not just talking about my friend's house. I'm talking about in the whole world, not really, right? But in my whole surroundings. Sometimes to really emphasize the lack of something, we can say there's no or there are no. For example, there's no juice left. There's no party here. There are no parties. Or there are no restaurants nearby. All right, so those are our negative sentences. What about the question? Well, we can use is there a or is there any or are there any? For example, is there any juice in the fridge? Is there a party tonight? Again here, using a party is specific. I want to know if there is a party at a specific location, time, etc. Are there any parties tonight? A general statement. Or are there any restaurants nearby? All right, so those were our negatives, our questions. What about the past and the future? Well, in the past, we replace there is with there was. For example, there was some juice in the fridge, or there wasn't any juice in the fridge. There was a party last night, or there wasn't a party last night. For there are, in the past, we replace it with there were. For example, there were parties last night, or there weren't any restaurants nearby. In the future, you'll be happy to know that there's only one way to say this. We use will be or won't be. For example, there'll be a party tomorrow, or there won't be any parties tomorrow. There'll be some restaurants nearby. Okay, so those rules are all well and good if we want to talk about one specific thing. But what if you have a list of things? And actually, this is a really interesting point for this topic. When we have a list of items, most commonly, especially in spoken English, we will choose either there is or there are based on the first item of the list. There is a table, 4 chairs, and a barbecue in the garden. Even though, of course, having a table, 4 chairs, and a barbecue, this is a plural amount of objects. A table is singular, so we start with there is. You could absolutely say there are a table, 4 chairs, and a barbecue in the garden, but there's something a little bit strange about the way that it sounds. And sometimes this happens in spoken language, that what kind of sounds pleasing to the ear seems to kind of defy grammar logic. Or, for example, we would say, there is a hat and a bag on the table, instead of there are a hat and a bag on the table. I should say that some grammar books do disagree with this rule of listing nouns. When you're speaking, I don't think it's worth it to really overthink using there is or there are. Choosing the object that has the closest proximity to the verb is usually fine. However, when you're writing, I understand you might hesitate. My advice would be, if you're really not sure, just reword the sentence. So for example, instead of saying there is a table, 4 chairs, and a barbecue, maybe just change the list to say there are 4 chairs, a table, and a barbecue in the garden. Continuing on with a similar topic, maybe of things that defy grammar laws, there is a very common mistake. And this one genuinely is a mistake that almost all native speakers are guilty of making. It's very often to hear native English speakers use there is, even for plural items. And I've even caught myself doing this. For example, if I'm looking for something, I might say, where's my glasses? Where's my shoes? Even though, of course, glasses, it's one object, but we treat it as a plural. Or shoes, again, they are plural. And I think the reason why we often do this, in my opinion, is because we tend to speak faster than we think. So, of course, we have this set phrase we like to use, where's my or there's, before we actually think of the object itself. And by the time we've thought of it, it's sort of too late and we just continue our sentence. So again, as I said, don't overthink it too much because most native speakers do misuse these phrases at some point. All right, let's do a quick exercise to check your understanding of this lesson. You can write your answers in the comments. A lot of people at the concert last night. Any butter left in the fridge? Well, guys, that's it for today's lesson. As always, if you want to support me here, please subscribe. Don't forget that there is a summary of this lesson with a short quiz to test your understanding, which you can download from the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye!